Can everyone hear me okay? Yes. Amazing. I'm Ken Bamberger. I'm the Rosalind and Arthur Gilbert Foundation Professor of Law here at UC Berkeley and co-faculty director of the Helen Diller Institute for Jewish Law and Israel Studies. And I am so pleased to welcome you to one of my favorite days of the year, the Helen Diller Institute's 17th Annual Robbins Collection Lecture on Jewish Law, Thought, and Identity, tonight with Lior Batnitsky, Professor of Religion, and Ronald O. Perelman, Professor of Jewish Studies at Princeton University. This lecture was born of nearly 2 decades of collaboration between the Diller Institute and the Robbins Collection at the law school, the Robbins Collection for Religious and Civil Law, which is a vibrant center for research that holds here at Berkeley Law one of the nation's largest collections of religious and Jewish law texts and manuscripts. Each year since 2010, we've brought together dynamic speakers to discuss critical topics within Jewish law and thought. Previous distinguished speakers have included Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks, Michael Walzer, Suzanne Stone, Moshe Halbertal, Susanna Heschel, Yuda Kurtzer, Christine Hayes last year, and many others. And I convey my deep gratitude to Professor Laurent Mayeli, the faculty director of the Robbins Collection, and to the whole staff of the Robbins for this amazing partnership. I'll also take a moment to thank and give gratitude to the leadership and staff of the Helen Diller Institute, including Rebecca and Leah and Georgia and Alexa and Matt and Noam, and especially Juan Zavala, who engaged in amazing administrative wizardry by airlifting our speaker out of blizzard impacted Princeton and getting her on a flight, albeit a lot later than she had hoped to come, to get here in time for the talk today. So thank you. I'm also very excited to honor our co-sponsors. First, I'll mention, I think I neglected to, Professor Ron Hassner, my amazing co-faculty director here at the at the Helen Diller Institute. And this year I'm excited to honor our co-sponsors, the Center for Jewish Studies, and welcome to its director, Professor Ethan Katz, and the Center for the Study of Religion. A bit about the Helen Diller Institute. Through its 2 programs, one in Jewish law and one in Israel studies, the Helen Diller Institute provides an academic forum for students and faculty. Currently, we house an undergraduate fellowship of 35 students, bring visiting faculty from Israel and US universities to teach and research at Berkeley, host the university's undergraduate minor in Israel studies, and offer dozens of lectures and program for the campus community, and like this one, also for the public. Our upcoming spring public programs include the annual Lubitsky Lecture on Israel and the European Union with Stanford Professor of Israel Studies Amichai Magen, that's March 18th. Then April 14th, a webinar conversation with David Horowitz, Editor-in-Chief of the Times of Israel. And then on April 20th, the last talk in our literary series, a conversation with Yuval Avivi and Donna Yoeli. That's April 20th. And you can find out more on our website or our social media, our email blasts, and see recordings of past programs. And I'll note that all of our programs are enabled entirely by philanthropic support. So we're grateful to all of our supporters and to the supporters in the community who are here today. Thank you for your partnership, and we encourage you and others to support this work. It has never been more important. Tonight, we're honored to welcome Professor Leora Batnitsky, one of the nation's leading scholars of Jewish thought, as our distinguished Robbins Collection lecturer. In fact, I would say that Professor Batnitsky is perhaps the most influential academic voice in Jewish thought today. She writes incredibly broadly on philosophy of religion, modern Jewish thought, hermeneutics, contemporary legal and political theory. She's written notable books on thinkers ranging from Franz Rosenzweig to Leo Strauss and Emmanuel Levinas, and her book, How Judaism Became a Religion, has become a crucial read for anyone seeking an entry gate to modern Jewish thought. I really recommend it. She'll shortly publish a book on Ecclesiastes, a biography, as part of the Lives of the Great Religious Books series, and is also working on two other books. The first, a comparative study of conversion controversies in Israel and India, and the second, on the Jewish apostate and Catholic saint Edith Stein, tentatively titled The Continued Relevance of Edith Stein for Jewish and Christian Self-Understanding. And Professor Batnitsky's tremendous breadth of impact is enhanced by her broad collaborations with leading scholars across disciplines in such an impressive way. She's in the final stages of co-editing the Princeton Companion to Jewish Studies with Steve Weitzman and Eve Krakowski. She's published with Professor Ilana Pardes, I note, a former Helen Diller visiting professor of Israeli literature in our Comp Lit department, on the Book of Job, Aesthetics, Ethics, and Hermeneutics, and with my colleague Hanoch Dagan, who is here with us today, on Institutionalizing Rights and Religion, and with Yoni Bronfman, an influential anthology on Jewish legal theories, a portion of which my Jewish law students, who I welcome tonight, will read later this semester, in fact, for our next class. Professor Batnitsky has served as the director of Princeton's program in Judaic Studies and won Princeton's President's Award for Distinguished Teaching. And it is such an honor and a pleasure to have you here. Please join me in welcoming Professor Leora Batnitsky.
Good evening, and thank you, Ken, for that incredibly generous introduction. I want to just start by saying it's very happy to be here. Wasn't sure it was going to happen. You're live in a good place. And I was also going to really, I'll just begin by thanking Juan Zavala for his incredible work, which I know took a lot of time, and also Rebecca Goldberg for a lot of work getting me here and many other things as well. I want to thank the Helen Diller Institute, the Robbins Collection, of course, Ken Bamberger and Ron Hausner, and also the Center for Jewish Studies and the Study of Religion. So, okay, let's begin. H.L.A. Hart begins his now classic text, The Concept of Law, of 1961, by noting that, quote, few questions concerning human society have been asked with such persistence and answered by serious thinkers in so many diverse, strange, and even paradoxical ways as the question, what is law? Hart continues, quote, even if we confine our attention to the legal theory of the last 150 years and neglect classical and medieval speculation about the nature of law, we shall find a situation not paralleled in any other subject, as is the question, what is law? End quote. Delineating the concept of law, and I stress the definite article here, there is one concept of law, is Hart's answer to the question, what is law? According to Hart, the concept of law consists in the combination of primary rules which govern behavior or require certain actions, and secondary rules which supply procedures for introducing, modifying, or enforcing primary rules. As students of analytic jurisprudence know, debates about what counts as law today continue, whether in agreement or disagreement, to hearken back to Hart's concept of law. In my remarks tonight, I want to connect Hart's query to an equally, if not more, vexing question: what is Judaism? By Judaism, I include not just a set of ideas and practices, but also Jews and Jewishness, and here the German Judentum is helpful since it may be translated alternatively as Jews, Jewishness, or Judaism, just like the Hebrew Yahadut, which also includes Jews, Jewishness, and Judaism. In asking what is Judaism, I think you'll agree with me that it is more than fair to use Hart's own statement that, quote, even if we confine our attention to discussions about what Judaism is in the last 150 years and neglect classical and medieval speculation about the nature of Judaism, we shall find a situation not paralleled in any other subject as to the question, what is Judaism? To say that Jews and non-Jews alike are confused about the definition of Judaism today would be a gross understatement. Anyone who opens a newspaper, let alone who looks at social media, is bombarded with conflicting accounts of what Judaism is and who the Jews are. To illustrate this confusion and lack of definition, let me hearken back now some 6 years ago to Donald Trump's first term in office, to his 2019 executive order on combating anti-Semitism. And here's how the New York Times described the order, along with an excerpt of the order. So this is the Times. The order will effectively interpret Judaism as a race or nationality, not just a religion, to prompt a federal law penalizing colleges and universities deemed to be shirking their responsibility to foster an open climate for minority students. And a little bit from the actual, Trump's actual order. Title VI prohibits the discrimination on the basis of race, color, and national origin in programs and activities receiving federal financial assistance. While Title VI does not cover discrimination based on religion, individuals who face discrimination on the basis of race, color, or national origin do not lose protection under Title VI for also being a member of a group that shares common religious practices. Discrimination against Jews may give rise to a Title VI violation when the discrimination is based on an individual's race, color, or national origin. And here are two different Jewish responses to that order in 2019. Here's first Jonathan Greenblatt, the CEO of the Anti-Defamation League, quote, in a climate of rising anti-Semitism, this executive order provides valuable guidance on anti-Semitism, giving law enforcement and campus officials an important additional tool to help identify and fight this pernicious hate, end quote. And here from the organization, If Not Now, quote, the executive order is not about keeping Jews safe, it's just more anti-Semitism. The order defines Judaism as a nationality, promoting the classically bigoted idea that American Jews are not, well, American, end quote. The remarkable thing about Trump's 2019 executive order and the Jewish reactions to it is that it's not remarkable at all. It would be an exaggeration, in fact, to suggest that, it would not be an exaggeration, in fact, to suggest that since 2019, and especially after October 7th and the war in Gaza, debates about how to define Judaism, again broadly conceived, have become commonplace among Jews and non-Jews alike. So what might the difficulty of defining Judaism have to do with the concept of law? Am I suggesting that what we need is a concept of Judaism like the concept of law? And you might be happy to hear or not happy to hear. My answer is no, I'm not suggesting that. Despite the title of my talk, Defining Judaism, I will not be offering a definition or concept of Judaism to parallel Hart's concept of law. This is because although I greatly admire its depth and clarity, I part ways with Hart's project in seeing the question of what is law and what is Judaism as timeless ones. Instead, I will argue tonight that these questions have histories, and their intertwined histories have implications for thinking about some of the most difficult questions that continue to plague Jewish thought and identity to this day. The contested natures of both Judaism and law emerge historically within the space of the nation state. So to explore the emergence of these contestations, this paper has two parts. In the first part, I consider the intertwined histories of debates about the definitions of law and Judaism by way of historical transformations of the Hebrew word dat in relation to the modern nation state. In the second part, I suggest that we find a mirror image of this historical transformation in the development of analytic jurisprudence negotiations of the concept of law or a concept of law in relation to the state. I want to explore how the concurrence between debates about definitions of law and Judaism define what Charles Taylor has called our social imaginary, and this is how Taylor describes social imaginary. The ways in which we imagine our social existence, how we fit together with others, how things go on between us and our fellows, the expectations which are normally met, and the deeper normative notions and images which underlie these expectations, end quote. My analysis tonight is diagnostic rather than constructive, by which I mean I am aimed to describe some of the historical and conceptual reasons why the definitions of law in Judaism are as contested as they are. In the conclusion of the paper, though, I'll try to ask the question of whether we can imagine things otherwise. And here we come to part one. When we begin to appreciate the intertwined we can begin to appreciate the intertwined histories of debates about the definitions of law in Judaism by briefly considering the contemporary Hebrew word for religion, dat. The Evan Shoshan Hebrew Dictionary and the Hebrew version of Wikipedia define dat in terms of faithfulness, in terms of emunah. Yet in its origins, and up until the early modern period, dat mostly meant law, not faith. And we find a record of the changing definitions of dat in Eliezer ben Yehuda's Dictionary of the Hebrew Language, published first in 1908. As is well known, Ben Yehuda's dictionary was a groundbreaking attempt to modernize the Hebrew language by collecting words from Jewish literatures, from the Bible to the present day, and cataloging their historical usages and contemporary meanings. At the beginning of the 20th century, Ben Yehuda notes that dat means decrees and ordinances, laws and customs that were fixed in accordance with God's commands, and faith in God's and ordinances that were fixed in accordance with God's commands. And here you can see, actually the whole dictionary is online if anyone's interested. This is where he defines first dat in this way, and then he defines dat on the next page, in terms of faith and knowledge of God. Okay, and so he describes this transformation in this dictionary. So our question then is, how did we get from here, that is from religion and law, in the first place, where dat means religion and law, to only religion? Okay. So, as probably everyone knows, or some of you know, next week is Purim, so this is appropriate. Dat's origin is Persian, and it appears in the scroll of Esther. The original meaning of the Persian datan is to give, and by inference to decree a law. Its original meaning is law, every law. It means human law, not particularly divine law, though it could, or particularly Jewish law. Every people has a particular dat, and so do the Jews. And so here, this is what we read, what Haman says to King Achashverosh, quote, "Here is a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom, and their laws, datehem, are different from those of every people. They neither keep the king's laws, dateh hamelech, therefore it does not profit the king to suffer them." So we see here how dat is used both ways, to mean both the Jews' laws and the king's laws. Dat appears only occasionally in rabbinic literature, though some of you may recognize the word from the Jewish wedding ceremony. Recited during the ring exchange under the chuppah, the groom typically makes this vow to the bride: Harei at mekudeshet li b'ta'abat zo kedat Moshe v'Yisrael, and that means, by this ring you are consecrated to me in accordance with the laws of Moses and the people of Israel. That's kedat Moshe v'Yisrael. Now, dat becomes more prevalent in the medieval period. Saadia Gaon, Joseph Albo, Judah Messer Leon, and Nissim of Marseille used the term dat in a variety of ways, but all of the ways in which they use the term do include law, whether human or divine. In the mid-15th century, Joseph Albo uses dat most extensively in his definition and classification of law at the beginning of his book of Roots, the Sefer HaIkarim, in which dat denotes every kind of law, including divine, natural, and human law. In the Judeo-Arabic context, and this is where I think things get very interesting, the Arabic deen, not to be confused with the Hebrew deen, so put that out of your mind. The Arabic deen, which connotes revealed religion and includes both true beliefs and law, is translated into Hebrew as dat. In referring to Din, translated into Hebrew as dot by Samuel ibn Tibbon, Moses Maimonides in his Guide of the Perplexed follows the Arabic philosopher Al-Farabi in referencing the idea of a total divine order that includes but is not limited to a concrete body of law within that order. In his Kuzari, Yehuda Halevi also utilizes the Judeo-Arabic term din, translated into Hebrew as dot by Yehuda ibn Tibbon, in the subtitle of his treatise, the Kuzari. The subtitle is The Book of Reputation and the Defense of the Despised Dot. Dot is usually translated into English as faith, but faith does not capture the thrust of Halevi's claim, which presents the despised dot as encompassing not merely faith or belief, but action. And those of you who are familiar with the Kuzari know that this is the case because the very premise of the treatise is Halevi telling about a dream being recalled by the king of the Khazars, in which an angel appears to him and tells him that his ways of thinking are pleasing to God, but not his ways of acting. And so therefore, this dot includes the ways of acting, and that's actually the whole point of the treatise, is the king converts to Judaism because he wants all his actions to be pleasing to God and not just his beliefs. Different as their philosophies are from one another, Maimonides and Halevi both insist on a fundamental tie between what we call today religion and law. The tie between the two is referred to as dot. Now, anyone familiar with Jewish texts and historical practices, for anyone familiar with these, the fluidity of the term dot makes sense because collective Jewish practices, otherwise known sometimes as law, go hand in hand with a whole variety of beliefs about those laws, God and the world. Those beliefs are sometimes referred to as religion. But something changes in the early modern period, and dot comes to refer only to belief and not to law. As Avram Melamed has shown, Simone Luzzatto's Discourse on the State of the Jews, and particularly those dwelling in the illustrious city of Venice, published in 1638, marks this change in the meaning of dot. Luzzatto describes Judaism as a religious faith like Christianity by translating dot as religio and religione. And students of religion, of the study of religion, know that there's a kind of parallel story that we can tell, that many people have told in different ways, about the change in the meaning of the word religion, but I leave that on the side. Much of the story of modern Judaism can be described as this very movement from the multiplicity of meanings found in dot, as it was historically conceived, to the one meaning of dot as referring to religion, and more specifically to religious belief. Put another way, what we see in this brief history of the term dot is an important marker of modernity, the insistence on an absolute distinction between the category of law and the category of religion. Spinoza's theological political treatise, published anonymously in 1670, theorizes the absolute distinction between the categories of religion and law that continues to circumscribe debates about the definition of Judaism to this day. Spinoza famously argues that the laws of the Hebrews, that is, the Jews, were only pertinent in the context of their original political meaning. Quote, ceremonial observances formed no part of the divine law and had nothing to do with blessedness and virtue, but had reference only to the elections of the Hebrews, that is, to their temporal bodily happiness and the tranquility of their kingdom, and therefore they were only valid while that kingdom lasted. End quote. Even though, or perhaps because, Spinoza was excommunicated from the Amsterdam Jewish community, he contends that Jewish law no longer corresponds to a political kingdom. It no longer can be meaningfully conceived of law. And this is because Spinoza defines law in a very specific way. This is how he defines law. Law is a rule for living whose only purpose is to protect life and preserve the country, end quote. Spinoza distinguishes between law that he delimits to the sovereign state from true religion that demands only knowledge and love of God. For Spinoza, Jewish law and Judaism more broadly therefore qualifies neither as law, since it is not tied to a sovereign political order, nor as religion, which he defines in terms of internal states of mind. The key word in Spinoza's definition of law is only. The only purpose of law is to protect life and preserve the country. Let me contrast this only with Maimonides' conception of dot, which brings with it a claim about a much more expansive purpose of law. As Maimonides famously put it in the Guide of the Perplexed, the intention or purpose of the law is two things, the welfare of the soul and the welfare of the body. As for the welfare of the soul, it consists in the multitudes acquiring correct opinions. As for the welfare of the body, it comes about by the improvement of their ways of living with one another. This cannot be achieved in any way by one isolated individual, for an individual can only attain all this through a political association, it being already known that man is political by nature, end quote. Now, notably, Maimonides uses the term Sharia in the original Judeo-Arabic, which is translated into Hebrew as Torah, because Maimonides is referring to the Sharia of Moses, Torat Moshe Rabbeinu. And both Sharia and Torah are rendered here in English as law. Once again, following Al-Farabi, Deen or Dat include Sharia or law. The point is that law and belief, the welfare of the body and the welfare of the soul, cannot be detached from one another. For Maimonides, following Aristotle, the political nature of human beings renders this the case. For Spinoza, in contrast, law and politics are far more limited. Law and politics have only one purpose, the protection of life and the preservation of country. Now, it bears noting that Maimonides' theoretical account of the political dimension of Jewish law is historically accurate. Far from having no political power, pre-modern Jewish communities were governed in large part by Jewish law, which was interpreted and applied by Jewish religious leaders, not just rabbis, but Jewish lay leaders as well, who exerted political authority and power, despite but also because of their complicated relationship to external political authorities. With the development of the modern nation state, the modern era reflects the stripping away of Jewish political authority and power from the point of view of Jewish collectivity. Spinoza's arguments anticipate this new reality, just as his biography testifies to the fact that this was not yet the case. Spinoza left a major conceptual problem for subsequent Jewish defenders of Judaism, once this kind of sovereign state that he only imagined came into existence. Jewish thinkers after Spinoza would have to contend with how they could possibly defend or even describe Jewish law once the concept of law was relegated only to the sovereign state. The way they did so was simple, if somewhat counterintuitive. Rather than call into question Spinoza's categories, law or religion, they accepted these distinct categories and simply argued that Jewish law was not law, but rather religion. This may seem an obvious point to many of us today, but that is only so for two reasons. First, the success of the modern nation state in claiming law for itself, and second, the success of a whole variety of Jewish thinkers in redescribing Jewish law not as law, but only as religion. Moses Mendelssohn was the first to do so explicitly. He used the word religion in characterizing what he called the ceremonial law, and he acknowledged, indeed he stressed, that Jewish religion was different from Christian religion because it focused on practice and not dogma. Yet Mendelssohn maintained that Jewish law was in no way political. The purpose of the ceremonial law was the cultivation of hearts and minds, not the regulation of communities. The father of modern orthodoxy, Samson Raphael Hirsch, despite his criticism of the term religion, followed in Mendelssohn's footsteps in emphasizing how Jewish law's, quote, timeless principles move and guide the genuine Jew without compulsion in every fiber of his heart and every stirring of his will, end quote. So too, Joseph Soloveitchik's philosophy of halakha posits halakha as a cognitive worldview and conceptual system and not as communal governance, while Yeshayahu Leibovich contends that halakha concerns individual duty to God and nothing else. Different as these thinkers are from one another, they all define Jewish law in terms of the cultivation of an internal disposition, that is, in terms of what we might call an attitude, rather than communal enforcement. This isn't to equate these thinkers with one another, they're really quite different from one another, but rather to suggest that their differences are ones of degree and not of kind. This is simply because of the shared political reality in which these thinkers found themselves. Whatever their ideological differences may have been, Judaism had become a religion, and Jewish law had to be conceptualized as such. In Spinoza's terms, Jewish law as religion is not a rule for living whose only purpose is to protect life and preserve the country, but rather an internal state of mind. We would now seem to have come full circle in our discussion of the transformation of the meaning of dat. Now, notably, Spinoza also left modern Jewish thinkers with a second option. In his chapter on the vocation of the Hebrews, the same chapter in which he claims that Jewish law could only have a political and not a religious meaning, Spinoza famously writes, "I think that the sign of circumcision has such great importance as almost to persuade me that this thing alone will preserve their nation," that's the Jews, "forever. And in fact, were it not that the principle of their religion weaken their courage, I would believe unreservedly that at some time, given an opportunity, since all things are changeable, they might reestablish their state, and God will choose them again." For many Zionist thinkers beginning in the 19th century, Spinoza's words were prophetic. Judaism, properly understood, was not a religion, but a nation in need of a state. As Moses Hess, one of the first Zionist theoreticians and a great admirer of Spinoza, affirmed, quote, "Nothing is more foreign to the spirit of Judaism than the idea of the salvation of the individual, which, according to the modern conception, is the cornerstone of religion." Hess's formulation of what he calls the cornerstone of the modern conception of religion as the salvation of the individual is helpful here. The separation of religion and law, which were once contained in Dot, is also the separation of the individual from the collective. Religion is the purview of the individual, law the purview of the collective. The choice between religion or law, or between the individual and the collective, is at the heart of confusion over definitions of Judaism today. The controversy over Trump's 2019 executive order, not to speak of ongoing and constant debate about Zionism and anti-Semitism over the last 2.5 years, is not something new, but rather reflects a dynamic put into motion by the advent of the modern nation state. Jews and Judaism could be conceptualized under the rubric of religion or under the rubric of law nation, but not both. This is the modern Jewish condition. But before saying more, I want to ask, what does this have to do, if anything at all, with modern legal theory? Oops, I'll go back one. Not yet. As is well known, modern legal theory developed alongside the modern nation state's claim for sovereignty, reflected once again in Spinoza's definition of law as rules for living whose only purpose is to protect life and preserve the country. With the rise of the modern nation state, law and modern legal institutions became the key vehicles through which sovereignty would be exercised. Early modern political jurisprudence, and particularly the philosophies of law articulated in the 16th and 17th centuries by Hugo Grotius, Samuel Pufendorf, and Christian Thomasius, attempted to provide theoretical frameworks for thinking about and implementing state and international law as distinct from church empires and estates. Grotius, Pufendorf, and Thomasius each attempted to defend a particularly modern, as distinct from a medieval Catholic, conception of natural law, rooted in the individual's and analogously the modern state's right to self-preservation. Each emphasized a natural right of sovereign states to govern their citizens and to defend themselves, as well as a kind of natural justice that governed the relations between sovereign states. While each of these jurists wrote from within a Christian context, a cornerstone of each of their arguments was what we might call, somewhat anachronistically, a distinction between the private and public spheres, with religion belonging to the former and the pursuit of social harmony and political security guaranteed by law to the latter. This division between, on the one hand, law defined only in terms of state law, and on the other, religion defined in terms of a private sphere, came to characterize not only how Jews began to redescribe and transform Jewish law, but also early modern political and legal theory. So what does this have to do with Hart's concept of law? And I'm going to skip a couple centuries now, and I'm going to come to the 19th century, and say that Hart's, as is well known, Hart's project is a response to Jeremy Bentham's and John Austin's early 19th century attempts to move away from the residual elements of natural law and natural right still associated with religion found in early modern accounts of law that I just talked about. This religious residue tied law to morality, and legal positivism was born to untie this knot. And these are Austin's famous words. The existence of law is one thing, its merit or demerit is another. Whether it be or be not is one inquiry. Whether it be or be not comfortable to an assumed standard is a different inquiry. A law which actually exists is a law, though we happen to dislike it, or though it vary from the text, by which we regulate our approbation and disapprobation, end quote. The posited part of legal positivism comes from Bentham and Austin's claims that it's the sovereign who posits or commands law. And what I just want to point out is how straightforward it is in Austin's thought that this is to separate law, positivism, from religion. Because the contrast is the following. If I believe, no matter why, that acts of a class or description are enjoined or forbidden by the deity, a sentiment of approbation or disapprobation is inseparably connected in my mind with a thought or conception of such act. So what's he saying? He's basically saying that if I think that God or deity gave me the law, then I have to think about this in terms of approbation or disapprobation. I have to think about this in terms of morality and whether I do this, but law, as he's describing it, modern law, gets rid of that. So the point is that legal positivism in the 19th century is based on the really moving away from this conception, and any remainder of conception of morality, which is really a remainder of conception of religion. So let's come to the 20th century and come to Hart. So when we get to the 20th century, the problem for Hart is that Bentham's and Austin's positivism still doesn't secure law as an independent concept because it's tied to political power. And the concept of law demands law's independence not just from morality and religion, but also from politics. And this is what I want to point out, is this way in which Hart is moving away from politics in particular. As students of analytic jurisprudence know, Hart's arguments continue to animate the field until today. For our purposes, I want to focus on one curious result of Hart's project. One of Hart's main innovations was to insist on law's internal perspective. Here we come to an especially intriguing point. Above, I suggested that modern Jewish thinkers were compelled to describe Jewish law in distinctly religious and not political terms because the modern state claimed the category of law for itself. This led modern Jewish thinkers of a variety of stripes to characterize Jewish law as an attitude and not primarily as a communal form of life. Strikingly, we find a similar move in late 20th century analytic jurisprudence in Ronald Dworkin's Law's Empire. And this is the last paragraph of a very big book. What is law? Law is not exhausted by any catalog or rules or principles, each with its own dominion over some discrete theater of behavior, nor by any roster of officials and their powers, each over part of our lives. Law's empire is defined by attitude, not territory or prowess or process. While Dworkin is a critic of aspects of Hart's concept of law, Dworkin's portrayal of law as an attitude is in keeping with the project of analytic jurisprudence founded by Hart, broadly conceived. One may in fact understand Law's empire as elucidating the internalist perspective of law at the heart of Hart's theory. The very argument that there is a concept of law as distinct from concepts of politics or morality demands an appreciation of the internal attitude that law cultivates. Strikingly, Dworkin, in this same last paragraph, describes the distinct attitude of law as follows. Law is a Protestant attitude that makes each citizen responsible for imagining what his society's public commitments to principle are and what these commitments require in new circumstances. By Protestant, Dworkin references a particularly modern conception of personal conviction, also known as faith. And Dworkin says as much as he continues, quote, law's attitude is constructive. It aims to show the best route to a better future, keeping the right faith with the past, end quote. With his description of law as a Protestant attitude that keeps the right faith, Dworkin would also seem to bring us back to the story of Dott's modern transformation. What should we conclude from this? One might conclude that the confluence between modern Jewish articulations of Jewish law after Spinoza and modern analytic accounts of law means that modern Jewish thinkers and analytic philosophers of law have independently arrived at the true concept of law. But this is the sort of conclusion and analysis that, in my view at least, should be resisted. Concepts of law reflect particular political as well as historical and cultural histories and arrangement. If there's a formal similarity between modern Jewish and analytic jurisprudential accounts of law suggesting that law requires, or perhaps truly is, a kind of religious attitude, this is because, despite their very significant differences, both these conceptions of law reflect attempts to carve out space independent of the force of the nation state. As modern conceptions of law and religion are both defined in contradistinction to politics, which is understood to be the purview only of the modern nation state, it should not be surprising that these constructs flow into one another. Part of what we learn from thinking about modern Jewish conceptions of law and analytic jurisprudence together is just how much space the modern nation state takes up. Here we can return to Spinoza one last time. As I argued, Spinoza left Jewish defenders of Judaism with only two possibilities: religion or nation. What we see now is that this binary is perhaps better understood as simply two sides of the same coin, because both options are premised on this notion that the sovereign state is supreme. Today's competing definitions of Judaism are but intensified iterations of the dilemma that modernity poses for Jews and Judaism. That these competing voices have become louder and louder makes even more sense after October 7th, in which both sides of the coin have been called into question. So now I come to my conclusion. Given that this is a lecture on Jewish law, thought, and identity, and given that this year marks the 250th anniversary of the United States, I want to conclude by noting that the coincidence between the crises over the meaning of Judaism today and the broader threat to the role of law and democratic norms in contemporary American politics is in fact no coincidence. Both reflect the ways in which our social imaginary has become increasingly strained and some of the ways in which this imaginary continues to constrain us. But I want to remind us that there are other ways to imagine both the modern nation state and Judaism's relationship to it. At a time of heightened anti-Semitic and anti-immigrant sentiment, it might help to recall a time in American history with many similarities to our own. Here I'm thinking of the publication of Mordecai Kaplan's Judaism as a Civilization almost 100 years ago. It was published in 1934, which people often forget was written as a response to anti-Semitism and at the height of anti-immigrant animus in the United States. In Judaism as a Civilization, Kaplan imagined what America might offer Jews and all of its citizens that European nation states could not. This meant, in order to see what was possible, qualifying the space taken up by the modern nation state by making room for more capacious forms of identity that go beyond the narrow range of religion, law, and nation, conceived in the narrow ways that I've talked about. Kaplan called these more capacious forms civilizations, and he insisted not only that one could and indeed must live in more than one civilization at once, but also that America was a place in which multiple civilizations could thrive. So I want to just read one quotation from Judaism as a Civilization that pertains to Jews particularly. For the Jews who live among nations which do not share their sovereignty with minorities, there has not yet been articulated any frankly avowed group category. The only group category that can render their position tenable is one that will recognize the moral and spiritual right to cultural hyphenisms. Religious freedom ought to include the freedom to foster whatever other civilization besides the one of the majority, which affords consolation or supports the human spirit in the same way as does conventional religion. Fundamentally, and here it's, I think, interesting, he mentions Catholics, not Protestants. Catholics and Jews are hyphenates. What is needed to normalize their state is to have the cultural hyphenism of minority groups accepted as legitimate. Kaplan's claim that Judaism is a civilization is a claim that Judaism is not only a religion, not only a nation, and not only a law, but all of these and more. So I want to conclude, and this really is the conclusion, by returning to Dot one last time. Kaplan's attempt to reimagine Judaism as a civilization might be understood as an early 20th century reconceptualization of medieval Jewish notions of Dot. For, like medieval conceptions of Dot, Kaplan's conception of Judaism as a civilization gives modern voice to the unavoidable connection between the individual and collective and between belief and practice. In the spirit of Kaplan, I've tried tonight to show some of the ways in which some of the discourses of modernity force us to tie ourselves up in knots when we try to separate the individual and the collective and belief and practice and religion and law completely from one another. As Kaplan recognized, the task is not to return to the past, but to broaden our imagination for the sake of a better future. Thank you. Okay, do you want me to stay up here?
Thank you so much for putting so much on our plate to think about and digest. I'm going to ask a question, but I want to plant in your heads that Professor Betnitsky has agreed to take questions from the group, and so I really encourage you to think of some. As always, students get priority, so I'm looking at you guys over there. I will ask, as we try to think about the model you've suggested, or the uncomfortable space that Judaism finds itself in, this multiplicity space. I'm curious, when you think about Kaplan's suggestion that America needs to accept the hyphenate, whether Jews and Judaism are like other groups, are Catholics, first of all, but other hyphenated groups, because I think we are obviously at a different place than we were in 1934 in terms of accepting that.
Sure.
But maybe that's a useful way to think about whether Judaism is different or exceptional or just like a lot of other groups also.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. So it's a good question. I think I'm going to answer how I think Kaplan should have answered. I don't know if he would have answered it exactly in this way. But I think that, one of the things that Kaplan did do, and I'm not necessarily endorsing this, but one of the things he's most famous for is saying we could no longer talk about Jewish chosenness or election, but instead he had this idea of vocation, where every group has a vocation that makes them special, but he was trying to get away from what at the time were very negative arguments about Jewish elections, especially by someone like Henry Ford, where this was like very much in the air. I think that without getting into a theological discussion, though I'm happy to if anyone's interested, but bracketing the theological question, I think that what he should have said, and I think maybe does say, is that in an important sense, Judaism's not that different. I mean, obviously, Jews and Judaism there's a particular history, and that history is particular and it's unique. But at the same time, this notion of individualism and the way in which an extreme notion of individualism and the way in which we would divide up the world into the way that what looks like universities and academic departments, as if there really are these absolute distinctions between philosophy and religion and morality, et cetera, that is an illusion, I think, for everybody, not just for Jews. Certainly it's an illusion for Catholics, and that's why I think it's historically significant that he brings that up in the kind of history of Catholicism in America. But I think that this Protestant with a lowercase p, because I think actual Protestants are more complicated than this, but Protestant with a lowercase p, this notion of it's all about the individual's internal life, I think Kaplan would say, and I would certainly say, is actually doesn't play out in reality for anybody. So that would be my answer. Yeah.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for the amazing lecture. I had a question. So towards the end of the lecture, you talked about this idea of hyphenated groups, the idea of, and I kind of perceived that to be like, oh, Catholic American, Jewish American, right? That whole hyphen. And that got me thinking a lot about the multicultural approach to combating anti-Semitism. And I think something that's really striking and something that I've learned definitely since October 7th is that approach largely has sort of, and this is my opinion, but largely has failed, because a lot of the deepest exclusions that we've seen, a lot of the most vitriolic rhetoric that we've seen has come out of spaces that are under the flagship of multiculturalism. So I was curious if this idea of okay, the answer is accept more hyphenated groups, if at one point there has to be this recognition of not every ideology is actually acceptable. Some ideologies are actually very problematic.
Okay, thanks. No, it's a great question. So of course, Kaplan, when he's talking about this, he predates some of that, the development of that kind of multiculturalism, which I would call more identity politics. Multiculturalism could be other things as well. So I would agree with you about, in my opinion, and I think in Kaplan's opinion too, the dead end of identity politics. But I think that's not what he means by hyphenates. I think that what he means by hyphenates is that we live in multiple communities at once. And so this is an instance of American Jews, two communities. But obviously there could be other other hyphenates, multiple hyphenates. And it's always a negotiation, and that's one of the things that he stressed is the need, one may agree or disagree with some of what he actually says. Judaism as Civilization is a very big book, and he had many practical suggestions. And he actually lived until he was 100 and something, and he had many practical suggestions. But I think that what he was getting at was that precisely what you're saying is that these views still need to be defended. They don't need, identity doesn't need to be justified in the sense that we don't have to say, and this is what he's writing against, say, in a European, in a, say, particularly German Jewish context, where many German Jews often felt that they had to defend themselves in German cultural terms only, and not in what we would maybe call more organically Jewish terms. He's writing against that. We don't need to defend who we are, but we do need to defend our values. And that's very much what is the case in Judaism as a Civilization. Now, Judaism and Civilization, and the Kaplan's project, I want to be clear, it's interesting. A friend of mine, I was telling him I was going to end this talk with Kaplan, and he said to me, he was my friend and co-editor of this Jewish Legal Theories volume, Yoni Brafman, and he really put it very nicely. He said that Kaplan's a duck rabbit. Does everyone know the duck rabbit? Wittgenstein's duck rabbit? So have you ever, like, you know how a rabbit can look like a duck and a rabbit? I mean, so like one of these, if you look at something one way and it looks the other way. And what he meant by this, I thought this was actually just an excellent point, is that on the one hand, everything that, I'm going to make a really strong statement. I mean, if you look at sort of what happened with Reconstructionism, and I have nothing against Reconstructionism, I want to say, you can't say it was a great success if you look at the sort of impact in various ways. On the other hand, so there's a failure, but on the other hand, Kaplan's ideas, these ideas about cultural hyphenates and what it meant, these civilizational ideas, are just absolutely the case in American life. I mean, so you may know Kaplan, one of the main things he did is, he invented the Jewish Community Center. Because he said, Jews shouldn't just be Jewish in the synagogue, they should play basketball. Now again, this is just like, it seems like a really obvious kind of thing. So I think that there's something interesting about his ideas that on the one hand, I think they failed, and on the other hand, I think they were enormously successful. And part of what I'm trying to say is that we need to just be rethinking in these more capacious terms at this moment. And I think he offers a model, but not something I'm saying we should return to in his own particular way. I mean, the whole history of it. But I mean, I would agree with you about identity politics, absolutely.
Thank you. And if folks who are asking questions can say their name and where they're coming from, that's great. Abdullah?
Hi, my name is Abdullah, and I'm from Saudi Arabia. Thank you very much for the...
You were in, but even better. Yeah.
Thank you very much for the lecture. I'm glad you brought up Wittgenstein, because I was going to ask about definitions. Sometimes I wonder, how much do we really need definitions in life? So do we really need the definition of a table to know what a table is, or to know how to use it, or how it relates to a chair and other close concepts? Like looking at definitions as opposed, or compared to, for example, genealogies as another concept. So what do you think? Do you think we really need definitions?
So yeah, it's also a good question. I mean, I think that I think the definitions are very problematic, and it would be nice if we could do away with them. The problem is that we are always operating with assumptions about definitions, and I think that a lot of certainly contemporary discourse about Jews, Judaism, etc. There are all these unstated assumptions, and part of what I was trying to get at was what are those assumptions? I think that in order to, the answer to it is not to try and give better definitions, because I think those are problematic, but to try and maybe think about why do we imagine the world in these kind of binary ways, where we think about, and those do have a history, and so there's something of a genealogy in this sense, is to show the kind of contingent nature. But on the other hand, I also think these are also definitions we're a little bit stuck with. And so part of what I just wanted to say is that we are the ones who make these things up. I tell people I'm in a religion department, and we have these 5 different subfields. And I tell like I was chair of my department for a long time, and I used to have to tell my colleagues, you have to remember we made these up. You know, these are not natural kinds. And so I think that part of what I just want to say is that we do just need to be more creative and try and think better ways of describing ourselves. But that doesn't mean, I agree with you, it doesn't mean that we're going to should come down to one definition.
Sometimes we crave after those made-up definitions coming from a campus that
Yes.
has no religion department
Yes.
at all, right?
Yes.
Leo, you have the mic.
Yes, thank you. My name is Leo Franks. I'm a PhD student in the history department. Forgive me if this is an incoherent question, but basically, I was trying to think through from your division of Dutt into the sort of the realm of belief of kind of philosophical world serving the mind, and then the sort of the more Spinozist reading of law, where it's something where law is sort of in service of the body, protecting the body. I guess, assuming that I've got that correct, I guess leading on from that, I was wondering how, if we follow maybe Spinoza's proposition, how law then, Jewish law and enacting Jewish law then engenders or necessitates a Jewish sovereign.
So, okay, so meaning, is the question why not choose Spinoza's second category, or second choice, you know?
That would be probably the correct way to take the question. The way that I was thinking was, how do you then get to a Jewish sovereign without, say, rather than a German sovereign, without returning to a leap of faith?
For Spinoza, or in general?
For us, if we take the division that you...
Well, part of what I was trying to say is that, you know, Spinoza basically, and this anachronistic say, this was not what was on his mind when he was doing this, but he ends up setting up two different possibilities. The possibility of you can live in a sovereign state in which religion is about having the right ideas about God, and then you follow the laws of the state. And even though he rules, he doesn't think Judaism has anything to offer there, but he makes that a possibility. And then he says, or you can live in a state where there is a Jewish sovereign, but for him, I mean, in his context, I mean, in the argument in the TTP is that, you know, the prophets, the divine law, the prophet's idea of the divine law isn't really divine. It's really about, Moses is a politician, and the prophets are politicians. So yes, you could make an argument like that, and lots of people have made arguments like that, not just for a Jewish state, but others. So part of what I was trying to suggest is that there are reasons why he makes this argument, but I think that we remain trapped in that argument in ways that are really not helpful. Is that, I don't know if that answers, yeah.
Hi, I'm Lior. I'm a third-year law student. And I know that your topic of focus is Jewish studies, so forgive me if this is a very legal question.
That's okay.
But I wanted to reflect back on the Trump's executive order regarding Title VI.
Yep.
And I could be wrong about this, but generally my understanding is that Title VI's job is to prevent discrimination for any programs that receive federal funding.
Yep.
And I understand that their definition of Judaism there is problematic if we're trying to understand the totality of Judaism. But I guess my question is, from an enforcement point of view, or just from a practical way of trying to prevent anti-Semitism in these programs, do you think that that definition is wrong? And if so, why, kind of?
Well, okay, so on the question of what's the best response to anti-Semitism and Trump, I was trying really hard to, you know, go really abstract, so I didn't have to answer that. I mean, I mean, I think I'll just say first what I was trying to do, and then I'll give you a real opinion, which is to say that on the one, to me, on the one hand, I think there's something in theory very legitimate about it. because Jews, one of the other things I was thinking of bringing up was when you see all these terrible hate crimes against Jews, and then someone gets on TV and says no one should be persecuted for their faith, and then you wonder, like, is that really why there was this violence because of the Jewish faith? And there's a disconnect there. So that's part of what I was trying to get at, is the disconnect. So I do think that the Title VI addresses that disconnect. So yes, I absolutely think it does address that disconnect. I also think that some of what Trump has done in the name of anti-Semitism is very bad for Jews and causes a lot of anti-Semitism. So if I had particular answers to give, like where to go with some of this, I would. I'm not keeping them to myself. But I appreciate the question. But I think that what's interesting is that it gets something right about what anti-Semitism is. That anti-Semitism, you can leave Israel out of it I think, is that anti-Semitism is not just hatred of Jews for their religious beliefs. And so the fact that it's very difficult to articulate that within the American legal system, I think, is highly significant. But I think that it's to the detriment, the fact that that's so difficult, I think, is also to the detriment of what I was trying to say at the end. It's kind of a more capacious view of Americans generally, not just Jews in this sense. Does that answer the question? Yeah.
I just want to mention that when Christine Hayes gave the Robbins lecture a year ago, and she got all kinds of questions, she said, I don't talk about anything after the year 600.
Yeah, I know. I'm the one who brought, that's why I tried to go to 2019, Yeah.
I know, you're next.
So I have two totally unrelated questions.
Yes.
One is, I was triggered by your invocation of Hart and Dworkin, and here's the way I understand what both of those Jewish thinkers
they are Jewish thinkers.
stand for.
Yeah.
I think they stand for the possibility of law being justified, and in very, very different ways. So for Hart, law is a social fact, and he emphasizes positivism in order for us to be able to take a distance and to criticize law from a moral perspective. For Dworkin, we need the critical resources from within.
Yes.
But both, in a sense, again, I'm not a biographer, I don't know if they're, but both in the sense, and Hart clearly, he was in British intelligence as a Jewish person at Oxford, teaching after that. And obviously was influenced by the Holocaust. The point was the possibility of law being so critical in our lives, given that law has done such awful things. So the question is whether there is any kind of parallel with the rethinking of what Judaism stands for, given that religions of all sorts have all, have done all kinds of things. That's one question. The other is much less theoretical, but like you talked about the hyphenated perspective and its significance here in America, and for Jews and for others, but specifically for Jews. And the question is whether you see any kind of parallel for that regarding Israel, Jewish identity in Israel, or any kind of a dialogue, for better or for worse, of the fact that there is not really such an answer for that in Israel and how it affects us here.
Right. So in a way, the second question is easier than the first. In a way, I think this is something that would be better for Israel if there was a more complicated conception of multiple forms of identity. And I think there are many unfortunate ways, for some understandable reasons, some less, some more problematic reasons, where there is much more of a push for a kind of monolithic identity. And so in that sense, Israel in a certain ways embodies some of the very problems with the modern nation state as such. So I think that this is something, I think Israeli Jews offer American Jews a lot of things, but I think that in some ways American Jews could offer Israeli Jews this as well, and also non-Jewish Israelis and also non-Jewish Americans in this way. So I think this goes back maybe to the first question, is I think this is for everyone. So in a way, my answer to that is in a little bit of my way in answer to the Hart-Dworkin issue. I think you're completely right, and I certainly didn't do justice, and I didn't mean to not recognize the reason. There are many reasons why Hart and Dworkin argued as they did, and I think, of course, Hart especially, but Dworkin as well, is really trying to think about the possibility of law as ultimately being a certain type of social, and in Dworkin's case, moral order. I think that's admirable. I think that the problem, however, is that, and I was trying to choose how to end. I was going to either end with Kaplan or then maybe say a little bit more about Maimonides, because Maimonides, I think, conception of law, even the perfection of the body, even if we leave out the perfection of the mind for a moment, or the perfection of the soul, the perfection of the body also, I think, has a lot to say about the necessity of virtue. And I think that that's something that's missing in modern legal theory. And so I think there are good reasons why Hart and Dworkin and others went the way that they went, but I think that when I look at discussions of law today and why a lot of times these invocations to the rule of law seem to ring empty in our contemporary context, I think it does have to do with the way in which we've lost connection to a notion of the common good, which I think virtue brings out. So I don't have a legal theory to replace it, but I think that there needs to be a little bit more than what they have. That would be my overall view. But I think you're certainly right that no one should think that what I said about them tonight really offers a kind of full account of why they argued as they did.
I'm Maury Lipstead. I'm a PhD student at the Graduate Theological Union. I'm wondering how this sort of argument and these ideas of law apply to various forms of the Jewish left that, like Kaplan, are not interested in either just religion or just a nation state, but offer something more critical towards both of them. And I'm thinking both historically, like the Bundists, the territorialists, groups like that, but also in the present and very close to home, people like Shaul Magid or Daniel Boyarin, who both sort of reject both categories and see Jewish law as kind of sites of resistance towards various forms of hegemony or even sovereignty.
Okay, thanks. So yeah, that's a big question also. I think that I'm certainly very sympathetic to. There are arguments on some parts of the Jewish left historically and today that want to see law in these kind of more capacious ways, beyond the state or private religion for sure. I think sometimes they, or often they tend to really romanticize Jewish law and as sites of resistance. So I think it's actually much more mixed than that. And so I think that if we really do want to fully think about the relationship between law and politics, we can't just have a conception of law where it's all peaceful and good and isn't involved also in political powers. And so I think one issue with some parts of the left, and this is a challenge for some parts of the left, is the role of institutions and the lack of institutions. And that's something I think the Jewish left has been talking about a lot lately, is the need to kind of develop Jewish institutions, and that's going to be interesting to see if that can be done. But I certainly think the more efforts there are to have these different forms of Jewish life, the better.
Hello, thank you again so much for a great lecture, and thank you for elucidating the separation between law and religion. Of course, you do that an amazing job in your book. Now, my question is you end with Kaplan, but you could, of course, end with any form of Jewish nationalism, which that has come up a couple of times in the questions. So really the question is, how does the law return to the definition of Judaism after Zionism and after any number of Jewish nationalisms? And this is evidenced by really Reform Judaism difficulty with accepting Jewish nationalism because it completely subverted their understanding and their own definition of Judaism. So what happens when we bring the law back into the definition of Judaism? And before you answer this question, oh yeah? Okay. I was going to collect.
Okay, all right. Thanks. Okay, so it's interesting you say that, right, that I end with Kaplan and Jewish nationalism. I don't consider Kaplan actually a Jewish nationalist. Yeah. Oh, I could have. Oh, I could have ended with that. Yeah, I think that, right, so okay, thank you. So I end with Kaplan because I'm saying I think that I see him as someone trying to get past this dichotomy by saying that the state shouldn't have so much room to define everything. So yeah, I think the question of how you bring back communal life, I mean, that's the question of the law, is just a giant question. And I think that this goes to the issue of institutions. It goes to the issue of education, most basically. I think that one of the very few things that I've found hopeful in the last 2.5 years is the I focus on Jewish education and both the interest in Jewish education for all kinds of people and also the Jewish communal. I think there's much more focus on education now and much more money going into that. And I think that's really the only way forward. So that's not a very specific answer, but I think that the way you have communal lives is you have to have institutions, you have to have these forms, and again, I think education and schools and camps and these kinds of things I think tend to be the most important components of that.
My name is Paula Fass, and I'm a historian, so I'm going to bring you back historically. You've given us an enormously rich range of thought.
Can you turn the mic?
Is it?
Just so we can make sure to get that
Okay. You've given us an enormously rich range of thought and thinkers. But I want to bring you back to that very critical period of a couple, maybe 300 years that Spinoza in some ways anticipated.
Yeah.
And that is the modern state coming into being. And in a sense, you haven't really addressed the consequences of the development of that modern state for the binary that's created, whether it's for Jews or for anyone else. Certainly in Western Europe, to a lesser degree in the United States, but also there, and to much lesser degree in Eastern Europe and in Russia and the empires there. But the Western European thought that you're really addressing is confronted by a period of history that helps us to understand why that binary is created and why it's such a difficult thing to kind of overcome that binary, the binary between religion and law. And Jews aren't the only ones who are caught in that. I mean, as Heschel was clearly aware. So now I want to bring you back to 250 years of American history. Because if there was a state where that possibility might have been bridged better, it was in the United States. And it was true in the United States for at least 150 years. So what we're dealing with right now is a period of reversion in many ways that has made that binary sharper, despite the emphasis on anti-Semitism and Trump's ideas. So can you talk a little bit, maybe for 5 minutes, about, I'm asking you to do even more, and I'm sorry for that, but about, you know, in a sense, what Spinoza and Hobbes, too, who are in conversation with each other, what they anticipate in terms of the development of modern European history.
Sure. Okay. Well, thanks. I'm actually teaching next week Hobbes and then Spinoza, so I guess I should have prepared better. But I am prepared. But I mean, I think no. Of course, you're right. I mean, and I tried to come a little bit back to it by, you know, I did mention some figures and also I talked about Mendelssohn and etc. But anyway, no. But you're right. Of course. I mean, of course, this is to say that my point was not that the modern nation state was a bad idea, to be clear. I think that the modern, this is what I tried at the end, and I'm saying this is why I tried at the end, is that the point is not to return, but to try and imagine something different for the future. That's what I want to really emphasize. So of course, the reasons why we have this divide in the first place is because there's a lot of religious fighting, a lot of violence. There is this kind of quest for toleration, and that's an excellent thing. The problem, though, with many of the ways in which those debates went is just, I mean, there are many things to say about it, but I mean, one thing to say about it is that well, I shouldn't say, there are people in the audience who know much more about this, I will say. But I'm saying, but those debates about tolerance within their kind of Christian Enlightenment context sometimes privileged a kind of universalism that was opposed itself to certain kinds of particularities. And I think this is where the dynamics develop. And so the whole question of what it means to be tolerant, I think became, let's put it this way, much more of, in a certain sense, a theoretical matter rather than a practical matter, the way in which the United States really aimed to have a kind of a more pluralistic society. And so, I mean, part of it has to do with the development of modern nationalism, with these imagined ideas of a common ancestry and a language and history that didn't leave room for real pluralism. I mean, I think it's not a coincidence, right, that so much of the animus in the U.S. and around the world is against immigrants. But in the U.S., we have a country, we're a country of immigrants. And that really is something that, there are many things like that make all of the difference. So I wasn't trying to suggest that there weren't extraordinarily excellent reasons for the development of the modern nation state. I wasn't trying to suggest that we go back to a pre-modern context at all. But I do think that America did offer a new views of doing some of this better. And I think America has done some of this better at times. We've had a lot of problems also. And I think right now we need to, as Americans, try and reimagine what America could be based on some of the best of what our kind of founding principles were, and obviously still dealing with the issues. So that's really what I was trying to say. But everyone should read Hobbes and Spinoza. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. So I'm just wondering, my name is Daniel Levy. I'm a Helen Diller Institute visiting professor from Herzliya in Israel. The two categories that you've invited us to think in terms of Judaism as a sort of a national expression or of an individual, religious confession. Arguably, Judaism has existed for the last 2,500 years as neither of those things, but rather as a system of community, where the practice was to enable people to join in Jewish community, and if to the extent that there is a normative aspect to it, it was very much about binding people together in community. So that's neither of the two options that you mentioned before, and I wonder where you see that as a possibility.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I mean, I think part of what I was trying to say is was that Judaism is, I mean, the individual is the individual and the collective. In this, that's what community is. I mean, community is about individuals and collectives, and individuals being part of the collective. And so this dichotomy between sort of private faith or national identity, each side, binary, in this extreme form, denies precisely that. So that's what I sort of see the development, at least if we look at it through this one idea of dot, as moving towards this binary. And again, there's a modern story that's very much parallel. So the question is, how can Jews understand themselves in terms that are more capacious? I know I keep using that term, but in these more communal terms, and part of what I was trying to say at the end is that I do think Kaplan is one figure who tried to do that, but I think the fact that he did that as in an American context is significant, because more than in a European context, it was possible to think in these broader ways. Yeah, so I mean, I agree. But the debates about today about Jews, anti-Semitism, Israel, etc., do take place with this binary. And that's, I think, the problem.
I'm going to hope this is brief. My name's Patricia. I went from being a sociologist of religion, Judaism, to politics. And in that role, so I served on city council for a while. In that role, I had to experience life as a hyphenated politician Jew, which had its own balancing act. But I also saw the way in which everybody like me, other minorities had to be balanced within in the community. So I'm wondering if you can speak to that more general sense of how, this really does speak to what you're talking about, America being immigrants. How do you balance those practically, community? And I know you're historian and philosopher, so it may not work,
right.
But.
Ethan's going to jump in too. Go for it.
Hi, Ethan Katz, History and Jewish Studies. Wonderful lecture. Thank you, Leora. For a lecture about law, you covered a huge amount, but I didn't hear about halakha, right? So I just wanted to ask a question about something more specific, which is we have a lot of scholarship that I think argues pretty persuasively that law itself has also become significantly narrowed in terms of our understanding of what it is, in terms of all kinds of issues within halakha itself in the modern era. People give different origin stories for that. And many would argue we need a more capacious understanding of how halakha works, and that there was a long time there were notions of that. And I'm just wondering whether you see the story you've told about religion and law interacting with that story, or as part of a different explanatory way of thinking about the sort of history of halakha.
Okay, great. Okay, thanks. Okay, so the first question, how to do it in real life. I think part of the way in which I really appreciate, first of all, you're saying that it wasn't just, someone Jewish who felt this kind of multiple identities, and I think that's really, I really want to emphasize that. I think it's most people are like this. And so I think it's really a question about having spaces where that really is a possibility, and it involves both being able to have one's communal allegiances, but also being open to a dialogue with other people and giving reasons for why you think things should be the way that they are, not just because of who you are, but because why you think this is good for everybody. This goes back to the notion of the common good. So I think we can have, what we need to have is both a relationship to our own particular identities and a notion of the common good. And one way that we do that is by understanding that we are always part of multiple communities at once. So that's again, more practical than that I can't get. The story of halakha, I think what I was arguing is very much in keeping with the way in which halakha, even the category of halakha, I think is a modern category. There didn't used to be halakha with a capital H or CH. It used to be, hilchot, laws of. And so you can look at this, you can see this, I'm sure it's true in other languages as well, but you can see this like in, when stuff starts getting, people start writing, Jews start writing in German, the way in which, Torah starts becoming translated into gazettes, and in English, the way in which even the brief thing I mentioned with a Guide of the Perplexed, in which, Torah is translated as law. So I think that, what really happens with modern, there's a lot to say about it. I'm saying there's a lot of parallels with one big part of the story I'll just mention, and then I'll stop, is the kind of rejection of custom as being part of law, which is a parallel in modern legal theory. You have the exact same parallel in, I didn't get into Eastern European context, but you can see this going on in the Eastern European context as well. So there's a lot to say about that. I think it's completely in line with what yeah, I was trying to argue. And again, arguments for people who want to have a more capacious view of halakha as well.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I want to end with 3 announcements and then a huge round of applause and appreciation. First of all, I just want to recognize and say how nice it is that Berkeley Arts and Humanities Dean Sarah Geyer is here, and convey my appreciation for all of our ongoing and burgeoning partnerships. I want to ask from the sacred to the profane, if everyone can make sure to please take all garbage with them when they leave, and from the sacred to the profane to the sacred. Thank you so much, Leora Batnitsky, for joining us today.
Thank you.
And sharing your thoughts with us.
Thank you. No, thank you. No, thank you.